Ready? Hotep.
Hotep.
My name is Sabir Bey, the host of Civil Alert on WURD. I know y'all heard of the brother Booker T quite a few times on the show, and it's a pleasure to have the brother here. And I'm basically let you take it from here. You know, welcome to the Pearl of Africa, basically. All right. And
Hotep.
Brother Booker T. Coleman traveled all the way from New York today to share this information with us, like you do also on weekends, you know, on Fridays. When he called into the show, I would like to introduce y'all, Brother Booker T. Coleman.
Hotep. 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 Hotep, brother. I appreciate you. Hotep, my brothers and sisters. It is good to be in Philadelphia. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here. As we said earlier, this happened in 1989. This was a conference that they had in Atlanta, and it was called Infusion of African and African American Content in the School Curriculum. And in this conference of October 1989, what they did was that every major presenter, they wrote their presentation. And what I'd like to do for a brother that had previously spoken about just understanding signs and symbols of primordial man and just we as a people, and what I think as an adult group of people having gone through a system of learning, not our children, but us, there is something that a sister by the name of Dr. Edlin, Ramona Edlin, had said during this presentation that I felt was very important for us to understand in order to see what it is that they're talking about. And this is one of the cornerstones to one of the great challenges we have in understanding our history and our culture. She says on page 43, in ancient Egypt, which as you know was the center of much of our golden age that we can still access, the process of thinking was very different from that which the Europeans have developed and advanced. The Egyptians thought in terms of symbols rather than objects. Now that's a cornerstone to our understanding. Our minds, our children's minds, think in symbols. We are a symbolic thinking people. We are metaphor. Asa Hilliard, who was one of the editors and co-conveners of this curriculum, once I remember said, and I have to look this word up, he said that figurative language was ubiquitous to African thought. And I had to look up that word ubiquitous. Our young people would say it's all up in here. In other words, in every facet of the atom of whatever is made up, the metaphor is there. Figurative language is there. When you look at what we've done in English, we have literally changed the structure of the way we speak in order to speak the way in which we think. So that when something becomes so good, and we don't have a word for that thing that's so good, we jump out the box and say that's bad. Our children say that's dope. There are many different ways that we express ourselves in the metaphor. Because if you didn't know what the metaphor for being bad was, you wouldn't understand what it was that we were saying. So that symbols become very important to the African thought process. And that's one of the things that we're trying to bring back to our understanding, that when you're looking at something, so that when you're looking at a book that's entitled Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, it's not so much the literal letters that you're reading that's going to access the information. Dr. Edlin goes on to say, symbolism is an intuitive means of overcoming the limitations of brain-centered reasoning. Symbolism is an intuitive means of overcoming the limitations of brain-centered reason. Symbolism does not merely count what the five senses can detect. It creates a new relationship between inner knowing and external analysis. When we're in classrooms, when we are teaching our children and when our children are learning, when we are in classrooms learning, this dynamic of symbolism plays a very important role to us. Because many times we sit in the audience and we're not so much listening to the words that the person's speaking, we're creating images around what the person is saying. So therefore, when we go back home and we're recollecting what's being talked about, many times we don't recall the words as much as we recall the images. So that we are a visual people. We are a people who take what's said and turn it into an image. When it becomes an image, then that's what we bring into the recesses of our consciousness. So that when we want to recall that incident, we don't recall the words, we recall the image. When you do that, you can take thousands of words and make one image. So therefore, when you look at the brilliance of our African ancestors and all the things that they were able to do on such a simplistic level, or as complex as it was, they didn't live a literal life. European objective linear thought consciously excludes any relationship to the unseen or spiritual dimension of life. But in the Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, we receive a whole complex of abstract, intuitive states of being, as well as material facts, which are not so much described as experienced in symbolism. We see not the effects, but the cause. We experience non-polarized expressions of the will or the spirit, not mere sequential sense reports based only in the limited perceptions of the human. Now, as teachers, when we go in the classrooms, we have to go in thinking that way. We have to go in knowing that our children really aren't so much picking up what we say as much as how we can create an image in the way we say it so they can then access that information. What I want to start off with us, and then we'll take a break. What I want to start off with is just a concept of just information. I don't think I've done this when I've come to visit our community here. We're going to break about 5:45. There's a gentleman by the name of Howard Gardner that came up with a concept that he called, he's from Harvard University. And he came to realize that when people learn, they learn many different ways. Okay, good, I don't need that? Oh, good, okay. And so when he would have a patient come to him, the patient would come, and up until that point, the Freudian way of dealing with people with internal emotional challenges was to consider the whole person ill, and then begin to deal with that person as a whole person, but ill. What Howard Gardner began to realize was that with his patients, there were some that were very gifted, extremely intelligent, but they also had problems in certain areas. So what Howard Gardner did was that he came up with a concept known as multiple intelligences. Multiple intelligences. And he said that every human being has many different areas of genius. And I'm going to give you the acronym, my skill. One of the intelligences was music. He said you could be a genius in music. He said you could be a genius intrapersonally. Intrapersonally, which means self-reflective. That student in your classroom that's very quiet, doesn't talk too much, but still is listening and still is understanding what you're saying. Intrapersonally, self-reflective. Spatial was another intelligence. This is the artist. This is the person that draws. Kinesthetic. Movement. This is the person that moves a lot in class. You have interpersonal. Interpersonal means that social person. That's the one that gets in trouble a lot because they're always talking to people in the classroom. The logic, which is the math and science that we teach today, and then the linguistics. Now, I always find it's very important to deal with when we're dealing with this subject, because this is methodology. Dr. Wade Nobles from California calls this the intent in education. It's far more than just teaching children about the pyramids and about Imhotep. As educators, we have to know where our intelligences are and that you can have more than one. You have all 7, by the way. It's according to where you focused your intelligence determines where you'll probably fall deeper in terms of being able to be a musician or being someone who is intrapersonal. Now, the reason why I give you this is because there's something known as the magic eye. I don't know if you've ever heard of the magic eye before, but the magic eye, and I'm going to ask for these back. But what I want to do, please, if you could just give one and then pass it around there, my sister. Now, what I want you to do is, I want you to take this, well, you'll see that it's a postcard on the back. Now, I want you to turn it over and make it so that it's in front of you. The colors are in front of you. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you that inside of this picture that you're looking at, there's a picture. And you may not be able to see it. So now I'm going to teach you how to do it. You bring it close to your nose, and you remove it about 6 inches, but the gaze that you had when it was close to you, keep that gaze. You're almost cross-eyed. You're almost looking inside that picture. And what's going to happen is that as you look at that picture, something's going to jump out at you. Okay? Now, some of you may not see it. So now here's what I'm going to tell you to do. I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to ask you to flip it around so that in the top right-hand corner it says hidden image. And in this hidden image, it's actually going to tell you what you're looking at. Flip it around and it'll say hidden image in the top right-hand corner. It's going to tell you what you're looking at inside that picture. Now I'm going to tell you to turn it back around and take it back to your nose, bring it back out. The gaze that you had when it was close to your face, I want you to keep that gaze. Some of you still might not see it. Hotep, brother. Hotep. Okay? Now, the reason why I'm doing this with you is because that's a lot like our history. For those of us in this class, in this room today, we tell our people about their history and who they are. We tell them about their genius. We tell them about what they can do. And for some reason or other, they just don't believe it. It's very much like this picture, because I told you what the image was. But if you didn't look at it the way you should, you still wouldn't see it. I can teach you how to look at it. I can even tell you what you're looking at. But if you don't take the initiative to have the ability to look at it a certain way, you're not going to see it no matter what. That's the way our people are with our history. This is the way they are with their intelligences. How many times do we say in class how intelligent they are and all the things that they have achieved and all the things that they can achieve? And for some reason or other, we're in a position. Right now, I have brought with me Mata products. Mata is a black business that came from a brother who sacrificed his life. The reason why that brother is no longer with us today is because he was on a mission to create a black-owned business for our community. Mata. And everywhere I go, whatever I speak on, I always tell folk that it's Mata time. I tell people that they have laundry detergent, that they have fabric softener, they have liquid detergent, they have hand cream, they have soap. And yet, there are those of us who still will go out into the community and will purchase other people's products while we have our own products. I will tell them, not only do we have an African-American owned company, but that the products are better than the products that you get at your local supermarket. But there are some of us who will still go to that supermarket in order to get those products, despite the fact that there is a way that, economically speaking, we can move our people ahead. So that is right in front of us. So there has to be something to this, that we are willingly, we volunteer to keep ourselves enslaved. When you're dealing in the classroom and we're teaching our children, we should walk into the classroom with these multiple intelligences. For example, I have a young brother or a young sister who has been taught rate times time equals distance, okay? And in this rate times time equals distance, please, brother, not doing too well, having a problem understanding the rate times time equals distance. In other words, thank you, brother. A train leaves New York City at 12 noon, is heading towards Philadelphia, is scheduled to get into Philadelphia at 2:30. However, in New Jersey, it stopped. How much quicker will it have to go in order to reach its destination at 2:30 on time? That's rate times time equals distance. The rate that the train travels times the time that it travels determines its distance. I have a student in my class, I give a test, and out of 10 questions, they get 9 wrong. The teacher of the class says to the student, "You failed. You don't understand rate times time equals distance." The young man feels kind of frustrated, upset, goes out to the basketball court and starts to shoot hoops. Pretty soon, in his frustration, he starts to focus and he gets net ball. In other words, that whoosh, it don't touch the rim, don't touch the backboard, it just goes straight in. Well, for that young player, that young brother, to be able to do that, this is the basketball court, basketball, and this is the brother. He's throwing the ball, it's going in the hoop. For him to have gotten that ball in the hoop, that young man would have had to have mastered the rate that he threw it times the time it's in the air and determine its distance. So does that young man understand rate times time equals distance? Or did he just not understand it the way I asked him to give it back to me? He does understand it. In fact, not only does he understand it, he understands it very well. In fact, not only does he understand it very well, but he can actually take the principle and bring it into motion. When this young man starts to use the backboard to go in, now he's added geometry, because now he started doing angles. And now he knows where he has to throw it to create the kind of angle that will have the ball go back through the hoop. So now he knows geometry. He knows rate times time equals distance. He knows, in fact, not only does he know it, he being it. He literally is taking that formula and he's being that math. So that the kinesthetic intelligence would say to me, if I was in a classroom, I want to take the coach, the basketball coach, the gym teacher, and the math teacher, and I want them all to come together. And I want them to do some staff development on how each of them can help each other and that young man and woman in classroom do their mathematics, because they're doing math on the basketball court. Every gym is a math laboratory, and every math laboratory is a gym. I have made basketball courts in my classroom, and I've taught math. When you're dealing with baseball, you're dealing with all sorts of math, percentages. You're dealing with physics in terms of watch, and not only that, but you got to watch that ball very closely, because the batter who's watching the pitcher throw that ball has to see that ball coming at him or her at a particular speed to know how to angle that bat to hit the ball so that it'll go either as a home run, or even when you simply bunt the ball, you've got to know principles of physics. Because if you bunt it wrong, you're going to get out, and chances are that person on third is going to get out too. So that the fundamental principles of the intelligence of that young man in the classroom is there. So that if a teacher understands multiple intelligences, he or she can use these intelligences to teach the children in our classroom. I have a situation where I have a student, and the student, I'm teaching fractions. Student is not doing too well in fractions. In fact, the young lady, out of 10 questions, she gets 8 wrong. And the teacher says to this young lady, you know, you don't understand fractions, and you failed. So in her frustration, she puts her headset on, and she goes out, she starts to sing. She sings Alicia Keys. She sings word for word, note for note. This young sister sounds good when she sings. Well, that young lady could not even have started that song without a fraction, because she got to know if it's 2/4 time, 3/4 time, 4/4 time. Music is nothing but the manipulation of mathematical principles. In fact, every musician is a mathematician, but every mathematician is not a musician. Reason why I'm saying this is because long before we get into the content material of our history and our culture, as educators and as parents, we have to know that every bathroom and every kitchen is a science laboratory. And if you want to help your child in science, just let them help you cook a meal or wash a dish, because you're using principles that teachers teach children in science class. So that in our schools where we have, well, let's even move out of the school, let's say we have people who are homeschooling their children. If we start to implement certain principles of education in our home, automatically they're learning things that they need to learn. So I want to start with the multiple intelligences, and I want to start with us understanding, first of all, what education is. And when I read that piece by Dr. Edlin, I wanted us just to understand what it is that we're doing when we learn. Why are we in the classroom? Why are we spending this time in the classroom in the first place? Our ancestors would have told us that we're in the classroom to learn. Our ancestors would have told us that we're there for consciousness. And I'd like to show you something. When we go to school, we learn basically something in the arts and the sciences. And in about 5 minutes, I'm going to have to make my way to my car and move it before I get in trouble. I'm going to have to go over to Whole Food. What I want to do is I just want to tell you that science equals knowledge. Applied. That's what it represents. Knowledge applied. You are applying knowledge. You're using knowledge. Science is knowing. As we call the Creator all-present, we also say all-knowing. And all-knowing we say omniscient, all-knowing. So scient is all-knowing. So science is knowledge, is knowing, and the patron in Kemet was the ibis bird that was called Tehuti. Later, Tehuti was called Thoth, and of course Thoth is where we get the word thought. Okay, when we track that word down. When we study in school, we study what is called the arts and sciences. And our brother, George G.M. James, says in Stolen Legacy that the object of studying was to liberate your ka, your spirit, from your jet or your body. And the more conscious you became in life, the lighter you became, and therefore you could liberate upon death. Your spirit literally came out of your body and you became one with the ancestral line. So now this is where we get the idea that from liberating your spirit comes the liberal arts. Okay? See, fundamentally, I believe we should start here and build up. Because I can always come back and talk to you about Egypt. I can always come back and talk to you about the Moors and about the Dogon. But I want us to start from ground zero. And ground zero is, why are we in the classroom in the first place, and what's the purpose in life? And when we look at that, we see that this society breaks it up. See, we used to have 3 sciences. It was called the spiritual sciences, the physical sciences, and the social sciences. Okay? Western society has a problem with the word spiritual science. So this is where we get the art from. We call it communication arts. Communication arts is the African spiritual sciences. Now what I'd like to do is I'd just like to stop here and be able to move my car, come through Whole Food, and then come back. I'm going to pick up where we left off and where we take. We said that there was one art and two science. We said that there was communication art, physical science, and social science. Keeping in mind what we said before about the multiple intelligences, now what we're going to do is we're going to break the communication arts into performing arts. Performing arts would include drama, music, singing, musical instruments. The second would be creative arts. Creative arts includes arts and crafts, sculpture, macrame, all those kinds of things that you use with your hands creatively. And then the final would be language arts. Language arts would include vocal languages, it would include drumming, it would include braille, it would include smoke signals, sign language. The physical sciences include the math and the science that we learn today. Science today is different from the science of the ancient world. Science in the ancient world was everything. Science today is the biologies, the chemistries, the physics, and things like that, oceanography. The social sciences include geography, history, politics, economics, and culture. There are 10 areas that we've outlined here. Now, my question before we can go on to you is there anything that you can learn in school that you wonder where it would fit within those 10 areas? Anything at all that you learn in school that you might wonder where it would fit? Please. English. Where would English fit? English in the terms of learning English as a language. Is that what you mean?
Well, actually, I was thinking about English as far as when they're teaching overall, because you're learning not just the language, the grammar, but you're also learning English literature, English.
So would you say English language arts, which would include all of those areas?
I don't know. Is it really?
Yes.
Okay.
And does anybody want to say where you might fit English language arts, whether it be the grammar, Shakespeare, literature, writing, novels? It would fit in language arts. Okay, it would fit in language arts. Now, interesting, you know it can cross over, because not only could it fit in language, but there's someplace else it could fit.
History.
It could fit in history. Where else could it fit?
Science.
It could fit in science. Where else would it fit? Culture, performing arts, politics. Okay, so that's where English would fit. Exactly. Where else is there any other subject that you have learned or could learn that you're wondering where it might fit in those 10 areas? To cook, where would cook be? Cooking. Culinary arts, where would that fit? It would fit in culture, yeah. Where else would it fit? It would fit in science, no doubt.
Math.
It would fit in math, okay.
Creative, yeah.
Creative, yes. Geography, according to what you cook and what you eat, determines on your geographic location. Okay? Is there anything else? Any subject, anything you could learn? Reason why I'm getting this, because I want us to get to the point that I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to say, would you come to a conclusion that everything that has been learned or could be learned can fit in one of those 10 categories. Because now I want to take you somewhere else. Because when you look at the way in which the ancient Kemites, if we just, please.
Well, I did learn a lot of mythology.
Mythology, okay.
Going into another area of art or spiritual science.
Are you, okay, where would mythology fit? Is there a particular mythology or just mythology in general? Culture, okay, where else would it fit? History, where else would it fit? Language, okay, that's what I was looking at. Okay? Now, you think of any subject now, see, because again, as teachers, as people who are out here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to the point where when an adult walks into a room or a teacher's in a classroom, I try to get the staff to walk into the classroom thinking this way. When you walk into the classroom, you're not teaching math class. You're teaching a whole bunch of things. And if you have 20 students in your classroom, Dr. Clark, Dr. John Henry Clark, who's my teacher, he called his method of teaching talking in a circle. Talking in a circle is a method of teaching where you can have 20 students with 20 different strengths, or maybe 10 strengths as they group together. You might have some musicians, you might have some sports people, you might have some artists, you might have people who are involved in geography, you might have some economists. But if Dr. Clark was trying to make a point, he knew that he would have to go out on a circle and bring everybody in so that they would understand what he was talking about. He just couldn't assume that what he was going to teach was going to be learned by everybody just because he was teaching it. So what he did is he talked in a circle where he brought everybody into the point that he was trying to make. So that in understanding this piece here, what I'd like to talk to you about is, in Kemet, they did not teach this way. They didn't teach this way. Going back to what Dr. Edlin was saying in the beginning, they didn't teach this way. Remember the multiple intelligences that we did. And remember the arts and sciences that we just did in terms of those 10 subject areas. Now I want to show you something. I want to give you some new numbers. New number symbols. Okay? Okay, new number symbols. This is now the symbol for 1, for 2, for 3. Suppose I were to ask you, in the new number system, I want you to write this number down. From what you remember about these numbers, how do you feel about those new numbers? Could you write those symbols down? The 4, the 8, and the 1. If you had a photographic memory, you could. When I first saw this, I couldn't. So I'm going to jump right to there and let you know I couldn't. See it? It's kind of difficult, wouldn't you say? Suppose, before I did that, I told you this. The 1, the 2, the 3. Suppose I had given you that tic-tac-toe figure first, and then asked you to give me the numbers. Would you have been able to do it a little bit easier than you could have the first time? Why?
Because you already know, you have a concept of how that looks.
I gave you a whole picture. And for you to draw back the 4, the 8, and the 1, the first thing you thought about was the whole, and then you withdrew the individual from the whole. European education, because they weren't around when the whole picture was first done. Hello, my sister. This is how we learn. Remember the subjects that we broke up? Please, sister, you want to come on in? Come on in. The subjects that you learn, this is how we learn them. We have math class, and then we have biology class, and then we might have gym class. We then might go and have a special reading class. We might have arts and crafts. We might have physical education. See, what has happened in our classroom is that Western civilization has broken up our day into these subjects. But the way in which African people would teach is that they would have taught, the Kemetic way of teaching is to teach the whole, and then to ask you to draw out of the whole the individual subjects. So that when they taught pyramids, they didn't teach pyramids just as history, they didn't teach it just as math, they taught you the whole abstract concept, like what Dr. Edlin was saying, in terms of the symbolism. And then out of the symbolism, our mind draws out those individual units. So if you want to know something about math and the pyramids, we could have drawn that out. As opposed to just giving us a math class, the whole conceptual framework would have been taught first, and then the questions, the consciousness, the genius would have then come out of these areas. This is why I'm saying, even if they were to teach African and African American studies in the Board of Ed, they wouldn't do it right. Because the methodology of teaching is so radically different symbolically than it is linearly. So that when our freshman children are sitting in high school class, they'll be taught this linearly. But they need to see the whole picture. And the only way to do that is for us to take over our own educational system. And that's the bottom line. So that now that we have these pieces, I want to build something else on top of this. Because the way I'm teaching you, the way I'm talking to you now, is the way in which Professor Clark would have talked to us in a circle. When you go and you get your master's degree, you, yes, please, brother.
So how does that work to their advantage, that method of teaching, and to our disadvantage?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. It doesn't work to anybody's advantage. Their children suffer by this as much as ours. Make no mistake about it. European American children are suffering and suffocating in ignorance. Make no mistake about this. They may have special things in their neighborhood. I don't know where it is in Philly, but in New York City, there are special pockets
That might be next time. No.
of peoples of European descent who have very special advantages. They get the very best of books. They get the very best of computers. They get good technology. I'll give you a story. I worked in a school on the east side in Manhattan that had children of African American descent who spoke Spanish or English, French and Dutch, all from the Caribbean and from the United States. A small pocket of them in this rather well-to-do European American dominated school. They asked me to come in and do some staff development. While I was there I was working with the teachers, but school was going on. At the end of the day, when my staff development was breaking up, parents were coming to pick up their children. And this school went up to the 8th grade. There were 8th grade parents meeting with the administration of that school, telling the administration, I'm not having my child take the state test. They boycotted the state test in New York State, the affluent communities. I'm just giving you an example in this particular school, but throughout Scarsdale, Hartsdale, upstate New York, affluent communities of European American parents would not allow their children to take the state test, and this is why. You see the multiple intelligences piece that I was talking to you about? That's an African model. That's nothing new. African folk have been teaching this way in ancient Kemet and amongst the Dogon and in Luunga in Central Africa, in South Africa. This is a method of teaching. It's called apprenticeship, by the way. That's our apprenticeship, is teaching in multiple intelligences. You find out where your gift is and you align yourself. You love to make shoes, you align yourself with the Kabbalah. If you love bodies and biology, you align yourself with the community doctor or the nurse or the midwife. Whatever area you like, By the time you're 16 years old, the community has identified your strength, and that's where you're going to go and study. It's called apprenticeship. Nothing new about that. But here's what happened. In New York City, they started to adapt this model of multiple intelligences that was first done by Howard Gardner, who was a psychologist, a psychiatrist, an educational psychiatrist by the name of Thomas Armstrong. He said, you know, that's interesting, because if that's true for counseling patients, that's also true for children in classrooms. So Thomas Armstrong took multiple intelligences and applied it to education. The affluent, rich communities with the money decided to embrace this method of teaching their children, knowing that the ancient or the modern African way of teaching is as applicable today as it was 5,000, 6,000 years ago. The parents refused, and what I found interesting, because I was very much involved in multiple intelligence because of the African influences, and so I sat in a meeting with the parents, and I said, you know, I started asking questions, and I said, well, why are you having such a problem with the state test? And they said, because the state test is not testing my children's intelligence. Because my child takes a test in science, and they ask my child a question about atoms, about electrons, neutrons, and protons in an atom. And my child gets the wrong answer. Last year, my child did horrible on the science test, but in multiple intelligences, one of the assignments for children is to come home and make an atom. They take these Connect little things that they buy in the store on the order of Legos, and they build atom. And they'll take one and make one electron, and that's hydrogen. And then they'll take two and they'll make helium. So they're literally building atoms at home. And the parents have an activity sheet where they ask children questions about that. But when these affluent children sat down to take the state test, they failed it because the method by which they asked the question doesn't match the way in which you would test a child using multiple intelligences. In multiple intelligences, you would ask the child to build an atom. When you sit down and you ask a child how many electrons go around a carbon atom, if a child cannot come up with the answer 6 and mark it down properly, they're going to get that answer wrong. But when they were building that atom, they knew to make 6. So that what I'm trying to say to you is this. They, Dateline did a piece on the TIMS test. The TIMS is an international math and science test that children take around the world. They take it in close to maybe 200 countries around the world. Okay? In 1998, there were only 12 countries in the world that did worse on the TIMS test than the children of the United States. And these children were the children of European descent. So that this educational system is devastating for all children. This method that we're talking about is good for all children. But children of African descent who think in symbols, this is an advantage for. But when you think according to your 5 senses and cannot get out of your 5 senses, breaking things up into individual areas is the best way of learning. But when you think conceptually, when you think curvilinearly, then breaking things up into different areas is a problem, because you need to see the whole picture. And basically what I find in many learners, not just African learners, but all learners, but particularly us, is we learn curvilinearly. We have to see how it applies to us for us to be able to apply it, to be able to use it, to be able to know it, and then to become conscious of it. So that's what I'm finding as a challenge. So this is good for any child, but particularly good for African children learning conceptually. A basketball player should know that you are manipulating mathematical principles when you're on that basketball court. They should know that. Musicians should know. You can't even, dancers think in 4. Dancers basically think in the base number 4. From 1, 2, 3, 4, and they go back to 1, 2, 3, 4, go back to 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how many musicians think. They think in the number 4, not the 10, but the 4. So if a teacher knows this, when I walk into a child and when I walk in a classroom and I see a child tapping their pencil on the desk or see them beating on the desk, I know they're musicians, because that's a musical intelligence right there. When I see your legs moving like that, that's a rhythmic expression. When you talk to somebody and they're nodding their head in understanding what you're saying, that's a rhythmic learner. They're learning by nodding their head as you're talking. They're assimilating the information, and that's how they learn. If you were to stop them from doing that, there's a chance that they would start to become static in their learning. The same way for many of us who use our hands when we talk. A lot of our linguistical expressions come through our hands. If you were to extend this out, this becomes dancing, and then dancing becomes a whole nother piece. And so that what I'm advocating is that this African-centered curriculum is far more than just learning your history. It's about learning science and math and physics and chemistry and all those different areas up there. Did I answer your question, my brother? Because I want to show you something. See how we broke all those up? Now here's, in ancient Kemet, what they did when you are in graduate school, you write a thesis at the end of your work, and we're going to, it's called a thesis paper, but we're going to call it a grad mag. I like to work in acronyms. Acronyms help me learn. Just like my skill was an acronym, grad mag. Graduate magazine is like a thesis paper. Our ancestors in ancient Kemet broke things up according to what they called the quadrivium and the trivium. This is what the Romans got. That's a Roman words coming from an African experience. This is called a quad, meaning 4 subjects, quadrivium, and a trivium, 3. These are basically the 7 liberal arts. Remember how we broke those things up amongst all those subjects and all the things that you learn in school? Well, here's how the Kemites learn things. The G stands for grammar. They learn grammar. What do you think the R stood for? Grammar is basically, grammar is the manipulation of your words. Grammar, it could include syntax, lexicon, accent. It could include punctuation, all of that. Say again? Close. Close. There was an RH. Okay? It's the manipulation of language. After you speak it, close. Rhetoric. Rhymes is close too, but it's rhetoric. Rhetoric. Okay? Rhetoric. That's what they taught. After you learn the words, you create the structure of the words, and then you start to play with the words. You start to move things around. You start to move meanings and background and context of words. Okay? The A. Close. 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 Arithmetic. Arithmetic. The fundamentals of numbers, the numerology. Because really numbers are symbols just like letters are symbols. So look at how they used to teach you parts of mathematics. They taught it to you at the same time they were teaching you language. See how even if they taught us our history and culture in school, they still wouldn't teach it to us right. Because this is the African model of education. Instead of having your subject areas, what they did was that they took an entire symbolic system of letters and numbers and meanings, and what they did is that they put all the subject areas according to that model and not the model that we have. But you see, linear thinking can only break things up the way in which we're learning in our classrooms today. With a math book, and break the math book up, and you have the arithmetic, and you have addition, subtraction, multiplication. You know when you multiply, you divide. When you do a multiplication table, you're automatically doing a division table. When you do an addition table, you're automatically doing a subtraction table. When you're doing one, you're doing the other, which goes back to the law of polarity. It goes back to twinness amongst the Dogon. So you're automatically doing it. It's already the yin and the yang. It's already all of that already. So that when we learn on that level, so our wave of learning comes this way and not what's happening in our classrooms today. It's not that our children are illiterate, it's that the teachers are illiterate to the manner of teaching to the children that they're teaching to. And you can't really blame them, because even us, we didn't learn this way either. We didn't learn this way. We learned the same way that we're trying to teach our children. And then the final is the law of opposites. I mean, this is when you have one thing and you just take that one thing and you turn it over to the other side. Dialectic. Dialectic. This is the quadrivium. This is the 4 subjects that when you went to school, this is what the 42 books of what they say Hermes was made from. The 42 books of the priests were built teaching this way, using these subject areas that we know today to be grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, and the dialectic. This is how they taught, this is how they learned. Now let's look at the trivia. Very interesting. The M stands for music. What do you think the A stands for? Close. What science is closely aligned to music? In fact, it's almost one and the same. When you learn one, you learn the other automatically. Astronomy. And the G. Music, astronomy, geometry. See, when I was thinking about coming here, talking about this subject, there were many different things, many different approaches I could have come. I know that there are scholars that are absolutely brilliant in certain areas of history and geography. I know you've had a number of folk to come in. My concern is education, and my concern is our children. My concern is that what we're doing to our children is so opposite what they need. Even if we think we're doing the right thing, with our hearts in the right place, if you don't know, you can't do. When we study our history and we learn how our ancestors learned, the pyramids were built thinking like this. It was not built thinking the way we think. That's why when the Japanese, with all of their technology, went to Egypt to rebuild those pyramids, they couldn't even build a mini pyramid. With all the technology that the Japanese had, they couldn't even build a mini pyramid. They could not even carve the stones. When they carved the stones and tried to make the pyramid, the stones cracked because they didn't know how to lay them. When they got down and got to the mountains to carve them out, they couldn't carve the stones out the mountain. When they finally did bring in today's technology to do it, they then put it on the boat and the boat sunk. Couldn't even get up the Nile or the Hapi. Okay, eventually they found a way to do it, and they brought them up the Nile. When they took the bricks off the boat sunk in the sand. They couldn't even get them across to where the pyramids were built. And they were only building a mini pyramid. So imagine building a 48-story building with stones from 2 to 13 tons. And they are so smoothly cut. To think that we believe that the tools that they will tell us that the Kemites or the Egyptians built those pyramids from, to actually believe that. In fact, if you believed that they used the tools that they say they used, the Kemites were more intelligent than even if they had laser technology. Because to be able to take a stone and make it so smooth. You know, when you have a table that's real smooth and you put face to face down, you can't lift the table up because it's so smooth, there's no oxygen that you can lift, so you got to slide the table off. There are stones in the pyramid that are so smoothly cut, you couldn't lift them up because they're so smooth. So from face of brick to face of brick is so smooth. You cannot cut brick using the kind of tools that they said. They said they used dolerite and they would freeze it and then heat it and then crack it. You would crack almost every stone that you tried to build. So when you're dealing with 2.5 million stones, and that every one of those stones is between 2 and 13 tons, it's very dangerous to think that what they're telling us our ancestors did, we did. Our ancestors were thinking on a different level. And that's not happening in our classrooms today. That kind of thinking is not happening in our classrooms today. Hotep, my sister, come on in. It's not happening in our classrooms today. They're not thinking this way. They're not doing the things that they're saying. And we're going right behind them believing what they're telling us about our ancestors. They cannot build the way they built when they built those pyramids. And that's because the way in which they're thinking is not there. In the school that we have in New York, it's called the Per Ankh, it's the House of Life. We begin by teaching the Kemetic origin of the universe. We teach astronomy. And because most people, I've learned over the years that people will attack you when you start to teach this, what I use is a primary source. The primary source that I use is called the Shabaka stone. The Shabaka stone today is in the British Museum. It's item number 498. There are 2 horizontal lines in hieroglyphs, and there are 62 vertical lines that go up and down. When I taught this class a number of years ago, there was a brother by the name of Nelson Ford who was an artist. And Nelson went home and he drew this picture. This picture is an artistic, spatial, visual view of what the Shabaka stone is saying. This stone is a scientific text. It's an astronomical text. It's a biological text, oceanography. It deals with chemistry. It deals with physics. In fact, you could even say it deals with the life sciences, the star sciences, the earth sciences, and the physical sciences, all on this one text. But the story is told in metaphor. And up until when I started to decipher this stone, it was said that this was an ethno-religious stone. This is not an ethno-religious stone. This is a sacred script that tells of a sacred science. Because we as a people cannot separate the sacred, the spiritual, from the science or the secular. We can't do that. Our minds start thinking schizophrenically when we start to split the two because they're one and the same. Now, there is a gentleman who has since transcended. His name is Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan had a program. And the program was called Cosmos. And in this Cosmos, he discussed, what he did was that he took the Big Bang and he made it a point of departure for what would become the life history of the cosmic universe. Now, what's interesting about this, when we talk about where do we begin? Well, let's just look at this calendar. What he did was that he broke it into a great cosmic year. He said that the first moment of January 1st, which is when in New York City the ball comes down and in 10 seconds it hits. Okay. Well, that is equivalent, when that ball hits the ground, that is equivalent to the Big Bang. And the entire 12 months basically is 1 billion years each going across here. During the first 2 months, January and February, coming up out of this grand explosion or this atomic revolution, you have coming up out of this one seed, the Dogon called Kizi Uzi. They called it Potolo, the smallest star. You have superclusters. Now, we just had the 4th of July, where they had all those fireworks. And I kind of tell the story looking at fireworks. Imagine a fireworks exploding. That one firework explodes. It sends out maybe 100 little starlights. Those starlights explode. Those starlights explode. So that basically is what you have happening here. From that one seed, there are millions of superclusters that come from that one seed. Then from the superclusters exploding, clusters come. From the clusters exploding, you have galaxies. From galaxies exploding, you have stars. From stars exploding, you have planets. And then on these planets, particularly our planet, you have life. The Shabaka stone tells this story. It tells it methodically, starting not only at the moment of the Big Bang, but our ancestors were so brilliant, they dared to philosophize as to what existed before the beginning began. And they call this state of being, they called it the Nun, the void. It was water. It was what science today called hydrogen in the very beginning. To get more information on this, I encourage you to read Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, Civilization or Barbarism, chapter 17. He deals with this concept of the Nun. It's revolutionary in thinking, because when we stop and we say to ourselves, which is what I wrestled with in the 80s, I wrestled with this concept. We had conferences and debates about this question. When a culture studies its culture, where does it begin? Some people say, well, you begin, well, unfortunately with us, we started with slavery, so you know how much trouble that is. So that's a big problem. Hello, my sisters, how are you? Hotep. That's a big problem. But suppose they said, well, start when humanity came on the earth. I don't think that's the place to start either. I don't think that's the place to start either. Suppose they said, well, start with the pyramids and technology. Well, that wouldn't be too good either. Because as this goes, and as the story goes in science and in the Shabaka stone, as the cosmic universe is unfolding and it's becoming all of this order and arrangement, it starts to pick up speed. It starts to pick up speed and really is going very quickly, so that the month of December, which is here, we have to break up into an entire calendar. Just one big 30-day calendar or 31-day calendar. Now, the reason why it's dangerous to start with the origins of life of humankind is because if you were to look at a map, go back to January 1st, on this map, humanity came to the planet on December 30th. So think of experiencing an entire year and beginning it on December 30th. Look how much time you're missing, because our ancestors taught that you were here back here. You're just not when you're born. You've been around from the beginning. And you will always be around. That's what science teaches too. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It has always been, it will always be, it just takes different forms. This is science teaches this, spirituality teaches this, and our ancestors taught this on the Shabaka stone. Now, pyramid building, getting married, cooking food, making jewelry, building pyramids, writing books, bringing up children, all of that would have occurred. Now, this is why we wrestled with this idea. This is why we begin our history when our ancestors became conscious enough to reflect on how they thought the universe existed prior to them coming into being. Consciousness. All that I said to you about getting married and cooking food and bringing up children and starting schools and writing books would have occurred the last 10 seconds of the last minute of the last hour of the last day of that cosmic year. So think about what I said. Remember when I began by saying that those last 10 seconds when that ball is coming down? Well, on December 31st, when that ball starts to descend down, those last 10 seconds, at that count of 1, according to our ancestors, that would have been when we became conscious enough to build the pyramids, to make jewelry, to get married, to cook food, to become conscious of each other. So if you wanted to begin at the pyramid age, you're dealing with the last 5 seconds of that cosmic year. Look how much of your experience you're missing. So that we wouldn't even start on this earth. We would have to start back here. We would have to start back here when the only thing that existed in the universe was black. the universe is made up of a black. We are pieces of that black on this planet. That's what our ancestors taught. We are pieces of stars. That's why our ancestors said that they were not children of the earth. They said they were children of the sun. Because they saw themselves not as earthlings, but as starlings. Take the idea to the Dogon. The Dogon will tell you that the essence of who they are came from another place besides Earth. Now, of course, our starling, our light and heat energy, mixing with the nitrogen cycle of the Earth, creates this body, creates this matter. But you know, matter is coagulated energy. And the deeper you go inside yourself, the more pure that energy becomes. So that when you get into your chakras, that's where pure energy is at its highest point. As you begin to move from your chakras out, that's when you start to materialize. And that is why when you die from the outside in, and that's why you have that carbon-14, nitrogen-14 dating. So now you can see a lot of what we're talking about. In certain ways I've used the word Africa, but in many ways I haven't, because this curriculum that we're talking about is about consciousness. Plants were meant to be green. Humans were meant to be black. And the further away the plant gets from the sun, the more albinoid it becomes. The more this African or this dark complexion individual moves away from the sun, the more albinoid it becomes. The lighter the eyes, the straighter the hair. This is just a reality of what we're facing as a people. And so what we've got to do now is get into these classrooms and begin to teach our children the realities of who they are as a people. We have to teach subjects such as the Dogon. The Dogon took Kemetic information to another level because they had more information on Sirius, the Sirius star system. And the Sirius star system is believed to be what we evolve. You know, like the Earth revolves around the sun, it is believed that our sun revolves around Sirius, and Sirius revolves around, and that revolves around something, so that we are constantly in motion. We're constantly rotating and revolving around things and moving at astronomical speeds. Say that again, brother? Oh, yes, man. There's no doubt. You can feel it. Everything. That's one of the laws. You know, when you go back into the book, I encourage you to get a book called the Kybalion. Kybalion. There are 7 principles of the universe, and one of them is the law of vibration. Everything vibrates. Nothing stands still. We may think we're sitting still, but we're vibrating right now. We are vibrating at atomic levels. So quickly we can't see. Our Earth is moving at astronomical speeds. The sun is moving at astronomical speeds. And we're constantly moving. And this is what our ancestors were talking about in the Shabaka stone. This is not new. The work of Albert Einstein, our ancestors were aware of the speed of light long before Einstein. They were aware before Max Planck of the quantum theory. And it's not a matter of superiority or inferiority, it's just a matter of primacy. Our children are taught that they have not contributed anything to this civilization. And when we start talking about what we've accomplished, they start calling that a feel-good curriculum. But the bottom line I've often said is that had you not created such a feel-bad curriculum, we wouldn't need a feel-good curriculum to neutralize all the negativity that you've put towards us. And what I tell children is that, you know, I bought a powerful dictionary, a big dictionary. And I just tell them, look up the word black. And one of them just look up the word black. And everything that follows the word black is bad. And then I say, look up the word white. And everything that follows the word white is good. And I say, what happens when we call ourselves black people and white people? What happens linguistically and psychologically to our minds when we take that word black that in this society has made it to be everything bad, and we ascribe it or we say it to ourselves? And this is what our children are experiencing in the classroom in so many different ways. We have to look at melanin. We have to study melanin. When you study melanin, it is equivalent, well, let me put it to you like this, because this is what I tell folks. When people tell me that that they study pre-med, when they tell me that they study biology, when they tell me that they study anything dealing with zoology, I ask them, what about melanin? If you can't tell me anything about melanin, if you're studying organic life and you don't know the role of melanin, it is equivalent to studying auto mechanics and you're never taught the role of gasoline in a car. Because gasoline is to a car what melanin is to organic life. And the reason why that is because of carbon. And carbon, when it coagulates on the planet, it's black. Carbon, as Dr. Diop teaches us, if you were to extract melanin from the skin, it would be a blue-black inky substance. That's what melanin would look like. And this is not a figment of an imagination. This is real science. This is why they stopped Diop from examining the mummies in Paris. Because he was finding out too much about the mummies. But more importantly, he was finding out about the principles of melanin. Melanin is a molecule. What's important about melanin is not that you have it, because everybody has it. If you didn't have melanin in your eyes, you wouldn't see. If you didn't have melanin in your ears, you couldn't hear. If you didn't have melanin in your bones would become deformed. If you didn't have melanin in your organs, they would not function. So you have melanin all over. Peoples of European descent, people of Asian descent have melanin. It's the production of melanin that's important. That's what's important. And a book to read about that, there are two books to read that I would recommend. One, of course, I go back to where I first got the information. Well, I'm going to give you a couple books. Richard King's work, The African Origins of Biological Psychiatry. Richard King's book on melanin. Carol Barnes's book, Melanin, the Chemical Key to Black Greatness. T.K. Moore has two books out on melanin. One is The Science of Melanin, and the other is Dark Matters. These are, and of course, the sister who I realized what she was saying after Richard King, but I remember she was telling us about melanin before I knew Richard King, and that was our good sister, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Melanin is part of science. It's part of astronomy, it's part of zoology, it's part of oceanography. We have to understand the role of the Moors. Our children have to understand the role that the Moors played in history, who they were. Because my problem is not so much what they say about the Moors. My problem is the fact that they're confusing the issue. What they've done is this, very skillful. They took the word Moor and they mixed it up with the word Muslim. They take the word Muslim and mix it up with the word Arab. And then pretty soon they start talking about Moorish Arabs. The word Moor means black. The word Moor is a medieval term that became Negro after the enslavement of the Moors. Before they were called the Moors, they were called Ethiopians, which means dark-faced. Ethiopia was the land of the burnt face. Ethiopians were the people from the land of the burnt face. Moor does not mean Muslim. My study of Moor tells me that there were Moors who were Christians. There were Moors who were Kemites or followed the Kemetic legacy. It is important that, yes, a very important facet of the Moors that went into Europe post 710 AD happened to practice the Islamic faith. But not all Moors are Muslims. You could be a Moor and not have any faith system that you followed particularly at all. And once we get to that, then we can understand that it was we the Moors, the Africans. And this is why our good brother, the Honorable Noble Drew Ali, becomes such a central focal point in our history. Because it was he, according to history, that had a very strong impact on another brother that brought forward another revolution, and his name was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a student of the Honorable Noble Drew Ali. Not only that, but Noble Drew Ali was a very influential person during the Harlem Renaissance. Because if you look at a picture, if you see a picture of Marcus Garvey sitting in a car, and he's dressed up in his regalia. Sometimes they have a very tight shot on Marcus Garvey. But sometimes they open up that shot, and there's a man sitting to his right. That man sitting to Marcus Garvey's right in that picture is the Honorable Noble Drew Ali.
I've seen it.
You've seen it.
Yes, sir.
If you get that bigger picture in the car, sitting next to Marcus Mosiah Garvey is the Honorable Noble Drew Ali. Honorable Noble Drew Ali had a very important role back in those days in terms of the formulation of African people becoming a nation within themselves. And out of this Moorish science tradition, the Honorable Noble Drew Ali was teaching a lot of science. He was teaching a lot of mathematics. And this is... Sorry. Sorry. This is why this book that this brother shared with me is so important. See, we need a think tank just on this book alone. It's the biography of Noble Drew Ali. I am so happy and so relieved, I should say content, that somebody took the time. The brother's name is Elihu, I just want to make sure, Elihu Pleasant Bay. And I appreciate this brother taking time, the exhuming of a nation, where it talks about the Noble Drew Ali, because he was a fundamental piece to our existence in the beginning of the 20th century. It's something that we have to start looking at as a people. And we have to start answering very important questions about what we should be teaching our children and how we should be teaching our children. Because we're not teaching them properly. Our intentions, we have the best intentions, but if the methodology is not there, the Moors used to teach. See, the Moors were the libraries, were the collected libraries of all ancient wisdom up until that point. And the Moors of their time took this information and took it to a higher level. To think that Africans brought into Europe sidewalks, streets lit by lamps for miles that you could walk. To think that the Moors were able to control the flow of water so that water could flow into your home where you could get both hot and cold water. That they could build according to the wind systems so that you had air conditioning in the warmer weather and heat in the cooler weather. This is what the Moors brought in. The Moors brought in strawberries and lemons. They brought in different ways of eating. They brought in the idea of eating in courses. They started the first musical conservatory in Europe. The first musical school was created by Moors. Every and almost every major university was created with people sitting at the feet of African people. And some of them became so smart that they moved from Spain and France under Alphonse X and moved to England. And they started the universities that we today call Oxford and Cambridge. Some of these people from Oxford and Cambridge became so smart they came to these new colonies and they started a college that's called King's College in New York City. And now we are so proud to say that we are some of the first people to attend Columbia University, yet we don't know that we built Columbia University. This is a part of our history that's totally lost. And that is because, as Charles Seifert, who was an expert on Ethiopia, said, a people without knowledge of their culture is like a tree without its roots. People can sell you anything if you don't know who you are. And this is what's happening to us. I know that there's a brother by the name of Listerville Middleton. He passed away, a young ancestor at the age of 50, but he wrote a poem that I always read. And at the end of his poem that he wrote called On the Origins of Things, he says, minute by minute, hour by hour, as you lose your history, you lose your power. So sharpen your eyes and tune your ear so that you know what you see and understand what you hear. And as a people, it is not that we've lost our history, it's that we've forgotten our history. We don't know how great we are. We don't know the things we've done. And we don't know that there was a short-statured man down south that literally saved America. Now I'm going to tell you a couple of things about this gentleman. Then I'm going to tell you a book to read that will tell you a little bit more about him. We don't teach this in our history class. We don't teach that there was a little short-statured African man that was the hero, the one hero of World War II. He, and he alone, beat the Nazis. He was the reason why Hitler went down and Japan surrendered. He was the one that brought a whole new world order, because rubber was in the Axis powers. Rubber plantations were in the hands of Germany, Japan, and Italy. And there was a man by the name of Henry Ford from Ford Motors that gave this short-statured man that used to wear a carnation in his lapel money to be able to build artificial rubber from plants, of which he did. And when George Washington Carver was able to make artificial rubber, that's what put wheels on the Jeeps and put wheels on airplanes that dropped the bombs that ended World War II. If it wasn't for George Washington Carver, this health food explosion wouldn't exist. He's the mastermind behind soy. He's the one that created soy. Crayola crayons can thank him for all the different colors of the crayons. George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver went out in Alabama into the countryside and stayed out there for 7 days and came back with 52 inventions. And when they asked that brother who taught him, he said the plants taught him. And they made fun of him. And George Washington Carver simply looked at them and said, well, you tell me. I was out there alone. You tell me who taught me. And they had to stop razzing him, because who did teach him? Now, again, going back to the African tradition, when George Washington Carver said the plants taught him, we know he wasn't talking about the way in which we teach. Plants weren't talking to him. But when you're so in tune with nature as that great Pharaoh was, that you could simply look at a plant and know its purpose on the planet, that plant is teaching you something. Please.
I'm loving this, first of all.
Hotep, my sister.
But as a former teacher,
Yes.
and thinking about children who are in the classroom, because that's your major concern,
Yes.
and it's mine too. Even if they know their history, what's more important to them, just the fact that we have to have this form, isolates our children. Mm-hmm. And they don't like that. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're not proud of who they are, what they want to be.
Sure, bless you.
But it takes their focus away from learning the things they need to learn.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
I follow you, yes.
What's more important is that they learn about that leaf.
Yes.
And what that leaf does in their lives and how they can relate to the leaf in their lives.
That's right.
History is going to come.
Yes.
But if they don't understand how this planet works for them, they're not going to learn astronomy,
Yes.
math,
That's right.
science. Because the bottom line is our kids are so far behind academically that the cultural swing has to get them to understand how important it is for them to learn.
Yes.
And that's missing.
That's right.
We can have all of that there.
That's right.
But the culture
Yeah.
does not respect learning, whether it's the history, the sciences, the languages. I'm pissed that the only languages taught to kids are French and Spanish.
That's right.
There
That's
could be an indigenous language from this land or an African language.
That's right.
It doesn't have to just be that.
That's right.
But how do we get the kids? How do we take this that we're learning about ourselves now
Yes.
and allow children to be able to be proud of learning?
Yes. Because that's the
Am I
key.
making sense?
Yes, you are, because that's the key. The key is learning. Culture is important, but culture is only important as the invisible process by which you become conscious. See, culture is a tool that you use. When I first started getting into astrophysics, I got in when I became aware I used my culture as a tool into analyzing what I was learning. And that's what has to happen in the classroom. All this that we talk about is fine. It's like Imhotep. It's one thing to know Imhotep, but it means nothing if all you're going to do is clap for him. You got to understand how to come back into your neighborhood and build buildings, how to use the 90-degree angle to build buildings. What role does pi play? What role does the golden mean play? And that it was within your culture and is within your ancestral memories, your collected unconscious, that you can access that information. It can be done. So what happens is that here in the Pearl of Africa, you start with what you got. That's what Adam Powell said. Drop your bucket. Well, that's what Booker T. Washington said. Adam Powell said, start with what you have in your hand. What do you have? Well, you have the Pearl of Africa. And I count about 6 young people in the room right now. You could start with the 6 young that we have. Start with what you have. Start with what you have and start a think tank. We don't need a new organization. We don't need a new religion. That's 2 things Dr. Clark said black folk got enough of. But whatever organization you belong to, bring this information back there. Start a little study group within that organization. Have our children get back to nature. What you're talking about, the leaf. Have them grow something in their house, whatever it may be. My question to you is, do you have power? Okay. If you have power, if we were to close down the Whole Foods and the Pathmarks and all the stores, where would your next meal come from? If you could say, I am self-sufficient, I have a little garden in my back where I got some cucumber and tomato, you got power. But if they close down your food stores and you can't eat, you don't have no power. I don't care if you have all that money on stock market. I don't care what you do on Wall Street. If you cannot feed yourself, you don't have power. I know 2 sisters that work in nutritional staff in the Board of Education. They have a little house in the Bronx. They got a little garden in the backyard. They grow tomato. They grow cucumber. They grow a little scallion. Those sisters got power. I know principals that live in apartments. They don't have power. Because all that money, Native Americans said, how long do we have to go before you know you can't eat money? Agriculture, going back to the land. Do you know there are farms down south that are going under because they don't have hands to work the farms? Wouldn't it be wonderful to start camps where we send our children to the farms of the south to help the farmers in the south take care of their land? Teach them how to do the land. Teach them how to plant. These are things that we have to do for our children, because that's really what all this comes down to. What is that leaf? What is the power of this education? You got to understand power. And Dr. Clark said, if education isn't about empowering the student, it ain't an education at all. All education has to be about power. And so these are some of the things that we have to start looking at in terms of developing our schools and what we want to do for our people. It has to be the application of knowledge. The Moors used to say, if what you learned you can do nothing with, you wasted your time learning it. You have to be able to know what to do with what you're learning. Our children are learning things only to pass the test. And after you pass the test, then you can move on. They give you a license. But you know what's frightening is that the great majority of people I know that have had car accidents had a license. The great majority of doctors I know that lost their patients on the table had a license. Almost every lawyer I know that lost a case had a license. Because you have a license don't mean that you know what you're doing. It just means you sat in the classroom and was able to go through certain steps in order to get to a certain point. And so that this is what you have to start to begin to look at and start to develop for our people in our classrooms. Last night won't be the last time I was on Civil Alert. I will continue to come and speak to the Philadelphia family. And if any of you are in touch with the Board of Education, and if I can support in any way what Sister Jennings, what Sister Dungy, I think, say again, Sandra Dungy Glenn is doing, anything I can do, I will definitely support. Whatever you're doing, I will support. But just know that this is the beginning. I shouldn't even say it's a beginning, it's just a continuance. Because all I'm doing is just part of that spoke of the wheel that's keep on doing it. But I'm about the curriculum. I'm about being in that classroom and finding out what to teach our children and how to teach it to them and how to take them to the next level of consciousness. Because the only thing that grows in the cosmic universe is consciousness. And so we have to teach them how to apply this information. What I'd like to do is just kind of bring this to any kind of discussion that you would like to have, any kind of comments that you have, questions. I would like to let you know that I have brought copies of the Shabaka Stone. I have brought some videotapes if you're interested. And I've also brought the audio tape with a curriculum on the Kemetic origin of the universe, if you're interested. So please feel free to ask any questions, make comments. I thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here, because I know how valuable your time is. I thank you so much. Shemem Hotep, Amun is satisfied. Not right now, but we will do it eventually. But so I'd like to, please, if you have any questions or comments.
Yes. My question is,
No, please sit.
what, or not the disciplines that we take this day, what is your approach for getting children to, what is your approach for getting children to modify their own behavior?
Yes. You know, it's funny that when I spoke to you about multiple intelligences, there's another piece I'm looking at that's called emotional intelligence. I worked in a school where the children were academically brilliant. They, you know, 1 to 4 is the numbers, they were popping up high 4s. But emotionally, they were as unstable emotionally as the children who may not have been performing well. One of the first things that I do is in an open discussion is to get these young people to understand who they are and what we have to do. That's all I ever do. There's no magic formula. Because one thing I've come to realize is that all of us are by matter of degree in a different place in this. There's no magical formula. The only thing I ever do is talk to them and explain to them. They have great things to do. You're wasting time. There was a plan for you. When you were born, there was a particular plan that the cosmos had for you. And you're just not doing what you're supposed to do. Now, why don't we just stop here and let's deal with what's going on? Because we're not getting any place if you're going to conduct yourself like that. That's how I break it to them. And that's the only thing I could possibly say. Because I know if I tried to kind of theorize on these great... See, no. I would suggest that you read the book by Amos Wilson, The Psychology of the Black Child, and Awakening the Black Genius in Black Children. Those 2 books can help you. And I think from there, he gives you ideas as to how to interact with our children. Because our children are reflections of the society. Nothing more, nothing less. You cannot go and bomb a place and say you're smoking people out and then wonder why brothers on the corner talking about, I'm going to smoke you out. They are modeling what they hear. They're modeling what they see. They are seeing violence working. They're seeing crime paying. We used to say crime don't pay. Crime does pay. And we're proving it to them every day. Long before we get upset with what our young people are speaking on the rap songs about, we need to get more concerned about the society that is building them through that. Do you know that the major companies that are running many of the rap artists, those same companies, when you get to the top now, I'm not talking about the intermediate people. The same people who are at the top running the rap industry are the same people who are in the privatization of the prison industrial complex. Study the corporations. Go up the ladder. A Bad Boy. A Rockaware. Go up to the top. P. Diddy don't own that company. Don't you ever believe that. G-Unit, none of that. There are other people way on top that you're not seeing. And the same people that are up there are also running the prison. So on the rap records, they're encouraging children to commit crime, and on the other side, they're incarcerating them. So they literally have a good business going on. Make them criminals, and then make them pay for the crime. And our young people aren't aware. When I visit prisons, I try to explain to them, you know, they're using you. You think you pimp, but you're being pimped. You're not the player, you're being played. You think you're a player. You're not player. I try to talk to them like that. That sort of kind of at least gets them thinking. But it takes a process, my sister. It's not easy. As the years have gone on, I'm 25 years in the Board of Education, it has increasingly become more difficult. As down as I try to be, as many organizations as I'm a part of, and my background in the Black Panther Party, my background in the organizations of our community, the role I played in the hip-hop culture, one-on-one with our brother African Bambaataa, the Zulu Nation. I remember the Zulu Nation when they walked the streets of the Bronx because I was there. I try to get our young people believe they invented rap music. They don't go back to the days of Grandmaster Flash and Melly Mel. You know, they don't go back to Pee Wee dance. They don't go back to break dancing. They don't go back to capoeira. They don't go back to the way in which Alex Haley found out his relative was Kunta Kinte, because that was a rap artist in Gambia that rapped the history of his lineage when he heard the name Kunta Kinte. They think this is new. This is nothing new. If there hadn't been bebop, there would be no hip-hop. That's the way I try to talk to them, sis. That's about all I can do. Because by every matter of degree, different children are at different places in their ability to hear what you have to say. I just never give up, and I never take it personal. And what I try to tell us is don't internalize it. They're not mad at you. They're mad at what their environment is telling them. And that's what we have to work on. I tell young people, look, we're one. I'm with you. They treat me the same way they treat you. We together can make something happen. So let's stop fighting. Let's stop the victim, stop victimizing the victim. And let's find a way together out of this situation. Thank you, my sister. Hotep, please.
Curriculum.
Yes.
Is it any type of curriculum? Thank you. Is it a certain type of curriculum that you can use to help us?
I have to honestly say that what I have found out is that to say that there is a curriculum, because a curriculum is a roadmap. I have evidences of explanations as to how you can teach science. I have videotapes that talk about how you can teach it. I have videotapes that demonstrate how to. But the bottom line is that a curriculum is pre-womb to post-tomb. It's an all-encompassing. From when that baby sleeps in your arms, and from when the baby's walking, and from my son with me, 11 years old, brother here, and brother back there, and that's where it starts, my brother here, at all levels by matter of degree. So a curriculum is a roadmap that takes people to the levels of consciousness. So conversations that you have with your children, things that you have them do with you at home, all of that is part of a curriculum. There are math curriculums, there's science curriculums. I've tried to break through just developing pieces of this when it comes to astronomy. I have some tapes, I have some curriculums where you can actually go through the process. You then, as the educator, the teacher, the mother, the adult, can then start to talk to the young lady about the astronomy and about the science and about the constellations. You can bring them out at nighttime and just have them look up. Go to a store and buy them a telescope. Every home should have a telescope and a microscope and a magnifying glass. And you should encourage your children to look through that. Take them outside at night and have them look at the sky in a telescope. Tell them that's what a star looks like. And if you put enough of them together, that's what the curriculum is about. You take them to the library. You take them to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Let them see that big brother, that's that Moor, and explain to them who that Moor is. Take them to science. Take them to planetariums. Take them on trips. Take them to the zoo. This is all part of the curriculum. It's all encompassing. What our society will have you believe is that there are books you can buy because they want to make money. And I have to be honest to tell you, there are books you can buy to help you help them. But a curriculum is a living spirit. There's no book that can teach you the living spirit. Just make sure your children are always with you when you're experiencing great things. And explain to them what they're experiencing. And when they ask you those questions, don't become tempered. When that why, just answer why. Because that's a spirit that's coming up out of them. To African people, it wasn't terrible twos, it was terrific twos. I worry about a child that doesn't ask the question why. That's the child that will be abducted on the street. That's the child that will be abused and will never tell you as your mother or father that there's someone on the block that keeps touching them every time they pass that corner to go to the store. I'm worried about a child that will not ask the question why. It's not terrible. It is wonderful. Just answer the question. That's a spirit that's manifesting in them at the age of 2 and 3. When they get to be 7 and 9, that's the pre-reasoning skills. That's when they take all their collective that they think they know and they start testing it to see it. That's where the parent comes in and starts to guide them. So that yes, there is a curriculum. I encourage you. I'm sure that Pearl of Africa may have books, children's books, and I'm sure that there are other places that you can go. I'm not sure if you have a Barnes & Noble here. They have a children's section. I always try to settle with my folk first. I try to get the book through my folk first, and then I will branch out to other places in order to get the kind of books that the young lady needs to take them through the process. This standardized test, there are two ways. I teach children how to take this test. There are two ways you can pass a standardized test. The first way is if you know the right answer. The second way is if you know all the wrong answers. You don't have to know anything to pass that test. And it doesn't mean that you're intelligent. It just, in fact, say again?
I said it means you're a good tester.
Yes. And your enemy, when you sit down, is not what you know. It's the time they give you to know. So what do you have to teach children? Time management. It's a skill. Time management. You open up a test and you go through the questions. You have 50 questions. Put your pencil down and just read through the questions. Don't answer anything. Don't touch anything. Just read the questions. Because you may find that question 40 answers question 7. You go through, out of 50 questions, you say, you know something? I know the answer to 35 questions. I know 35. Now, if you take every question as you go, you may never get to question 50 because there are going to be questions that's going to stump you. But if you go through that test and you say, you know, I know question 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I know 35 answers. 10, I'm going to have to think about. I think I know. 5 is going to give me a real hard time. You go back and you answer the 35 that you know. That's pretty good. 35 out of 50, not bad. And let's say it takes you 15 minutes. Let's say it takes you 10 minutes to read all the questions. Then let's say it takes you 15 minutes to fill in all 35 questions. Well, now you just spent 25 minutes. Let's say you have an hour. You spent 25 minutes, and now you know you have 35 answers right. That's very good on a test. Now you go back to the other 10. That's going to give you a little bit of trouble, and you wrestle with them. You have 35 minutes left on this test. You spend 15 minutes wrestling with those 10 questions, and out of those 10 questions, you get 7 right. Well, that's not bad. Now you're at 42 out of 50. And now you get to the 5. That's going to give you a hard time, and let's say now you know 3. Although they're difficult, you know the answer to 3. You may work it out. Now, out of 50 questions, you got 45 right. And now you got 10 minutes to spare, so you go back around and you start with what you may have had a problem with. It's a strategy. Time management. And as many times as I try to get children, don't touch your pencil until you go through all the questions. The first thing they start doing is they just... I once took a test, and the teacher used to always say, read the questions, read the questions. One time we took a test, and me being a hard-headed knucklehead, I thought I knew it all. I just started answering all the questions, and question number 40, if you've made any marks on your answer booklet, you just failed the test, because I told you, follow directions, and I told you, don't answer the questions. See, if I had read it first, I would have known not to answer. That was a test that I never forgot, because from that day on, I've always kept my pencil down when I take a test, and I just read the questions. It's what I call introducing yourself to the test. These are things that you can start to do. You can start to teach your young people how to do that. You can go to Barnes & Noble, and you can start to get the standardized tests to teach them. They could even start bubbling in is a skill. They can start to do is just bubble in their name. Just get an answer sheet and have them do from A to Z with circles, and just have the young ladies bubble in her name, bubble in her address, bubble in her phone number, bubble in a sentence. That's how they can just start the skill of bubbling in. These are little things that you can start doing to get them to a certain point for them to master. Because this standardized test, this is low-level thinking. We have to get them past this. I hope to come back to be able to fill in more questions and deal with more. Anything we can do to keep supporting?
You told me before I called on the radio for the homeschooling. You told me one, homeschooling for dummies. And
Oh, yes.
another one.
Yes, homeschooling for dummies, and I think the other one was homeschooling for idiots. But basically, that tells you your rights. Because you have the right to your schools, your neighborhood school's gymnasium. You have right for them to eat at that school. There are certain rights that you have while you're homeschooling them. You can take in different places. And then, of course, keeping these kind of dialogues going, feeding you the kind of information that you can then go back and teach your family this information. And always remember, wherever you have water, class, in your bathroom and in your kitchen is your science laboratories. Please.
There's also, if you live in Pennsylvania, there is a virtual homeschool. You can go online, register your child, and they will provide you with
Okay.
I think it's one month, someone will come out to take the child on field trips. They have it all set up. All you have to do, and I don't know the website, but if you in virtual